Hey everyone. Welcome back to Strange Mind 6. I'm your host Ruby, and today we're going to be getting back into Chicken Soup for the Dog Lover's Soul. Stories of canine companionship, comedy, and courage. Written by Jack Canfield, by Mark Victor Hansen, by Marty Becker, by DVM, by Carl Klein, and by Amy D. Soja. This is a Scholastics book. If you do want to read this on your own time. And without further ado, my dear friends, I do want to first address why I've been absent a couple of days now. I was actually very sick. Um, I, without getting you guys worried. I'm doing much better now, thankfully. Um, but but yeah, nothing that antibiotics, medication, and things like that couldn't do to help me get better. So that's a good thing. But without further ado, my dear friends, grab a snack, grab a drink, or sit back and relax, and let's get to it. Jethro's World. My dog, Jethro, a Rottweiler German Shepherd mix, was always low-key, gentle, and well-mannered. From the moment we met at the animal shelter, when he was just 9 months old, to the day he died, two things were clear. Jethro and I had a special bond, and he had a soul of exceptional kindness and compassion. Jethro never chased animals. He just loved to hang out and watch the world around him. He was a perfect field assistant for me as I studied the various birds, including western evening grosbeaks and Steller's jays. Living near my house in the foothills of the Colorado Rockies. One day, while I was sitting inside, I heard Jethro come to the front door instead of whining as he usually did when he wanted to come in. He just sat there. I looked out and looked at him and noticed a small furry object in his mouth. My first reaction was, oh no, he killed a bird. However, when I opened the door, Jethro proceeded to drop at my feet a very young bunny drenched in his saliva and very much alive. I could not see any injuries, only a small bundle of fur that needed warmth, food, and love. I guessed that the bunny's mother had most likely fallen prey to a coyote, red fox, or the occasional mountain lion around my house. Jethro looked up at me, wide-eyed, as if he wanted me to praise him. I did. He seemed so proud of himself, but when I picked up the bunny, Jethro's pride turned to concern. He tried to snatch her from my hands, but failed. Whining, he followed me around as I gathered a box, a blanket, some water, and food. I gently placed the bunny in the box, named her Bunny, and wrapped her in the blanket. I put some finely chopped carrots, celery, and lettuce near her. She tried to eat it. I made sure that she knew where the water was. The whole time Jethro was standing behind me, panting, dripping saliva on my shoulder, watching my every move. I thought he might go for Bunny or the food, but he simply stood there, fascinated by the little ball of fur, slowly moving around in her new home. When I turned to leave the box, I called Jethro, but he didn't move. He usually came to me immediately, especially when I offered him a bone, but that day he remained steadfastly near the box. Hours passed, and nothing could entice him away from his spot near Bunny. Eventually, I had to drag Jethro out for his nightly walk. When we returned, he made a beeline for the box, where he slept through the night. I tried to get Jethro to go to his usual sleeping spot, but he refused. His intention was clear. No way, I'm staying here. I trusted Jethro not to harm Bunny, and during the 2 weeks that I nursed her back to health, he didn't do anything to even scare her. Jethro had adopted Bunny. He would make sure that no one harmed her. Finally, the day came when I introduced Bunny to the outdoors. Jethro and I walked to the east side of my house and released her from the box. We watched her slowly make her way into a wood pile. She was cautious, her senses overwhelmed by the new stimuli, sights, sounds, odors to which she was now exposed. Bunny remained in the woodpile for about an hour until she boldly stepped out to begin new life as a full-fledged wild rabbit. Jethro remained in the same spot as he watched the scene. He never took his eyes off Bunny and never tried to approach her. Bunny hung around for a few months. Every time I let Jethro out of the house, he immediately ran to the place where she had been released. When he arrived there, he would cock his head and move it from side to side, looking for Bunny. This lasted for about 6 months. If I said Bunny in a high-pitched voice, Jethro would whine and go look for her. He loved Bunny and was hoping to see her once more. I am not sure what happened to Bunny. Most likely, she simply lived out her life in the area around my home. Since then, other bunnies and adult rabbits have come and gone, and I've observed that Jethro never chases them. Instead, he tries to get close to them, as close as he can, and looks at each of them, perhaps wondering if they are Bunny. A few summers ago, many years after we met Bunny and treated her with such delicate compassion, Jethro came running up to me with a wet animal in his mouth. I wonder. Another bunny? I asked him to drop it. This time it was a young bird that had flown into a window. It was stunned and just needed to regain its senses. I held it in my hands for a few minutes. Jethro, in true Jethro fashion, never took his eyes off the bird. He watched my every move. When I thought the bird was ready to fly, I placed it on the railing of my porch. Jethro approached it, sniffed it, stepped back, and watched it fly away. When it was out of sight, he turned to me and seemed to give the canine equivalent of a shrug. Then, together, we took a long, meandering stroll down the road leading away from my house. All was well in Jethro's world once more. Story 2. The Great Dog Walk. Although I was born and raised in New York City, my parents had an exuberance for the great outdoors. Every summer, Dad rented a small cottage for us on the eastern end of Long Island. The cottage was nestled in a wooded area close to the beach, so my childhood encompassed fishing, swimming, boating, and the pure enjoyment of the environment. After I married and had children, We lived down the street from my parents and continued to join them on their yearly retreats to Long Island. One year, shortly before summer vacation, my parents adopted a magnificent English Basset Hound puppy. My two daughters were overjoyed. The dog immediately became the most important thing in their lives. They named the puppy Huckleberry Hound after the television cartoon character. Every day after school, they headed to their grandparents' house to walk and feed the dog. The trio basked in the admiring glances they received as they paraded around the neighborhood. Huckleberry was certainly a sight to behold, with his elongated body and droopy ears that nearly touched the ground. His four stubby legs were attached to an extra large paws that he tripped over constantly. His narrow face held two of the most soulful eyes imaginable. Huckleberry swaggered down the street as if he knew he was special and enjoyed every moment of the attention showered upon him. Our first summer journey to the cottage with Huckleberry was a true nightmare. He disliked the motion of the car and became violently ill. He tossed and turned on the back seat, his eyes rolling and his tongue hanging from his mouth. He drooled so much that my mother got her new shower curtain from the trunk of the car and draped it around the girls who were riding in the back seat with Huckleberry. We all arrived exhausted from the trip. Even with the shower curtain, the girls were wet with slime and smelled like the city zoo. When Huckleberry emerged from the car, he gazed at his new surroundings, standing dumbstruck for the longest time. Then he began to bark. Where were all the tall buildings, the fire hydrants, and the curbs to sniff? Where were all his loyal fans? A flock of geese flew overhead, honking loudly. Two frogs jumped directly in front of the trembling animal. A butterfly landed on his head, and a stray cat hissed at him in passing. It was all too much for this poor urban creature. He fled into the house under the nearest piece of furniture. Huckleberry was a city hound. Give him a concrete sidewalk and he was in his element. The country offered him no benefits. He became a recluse and spent his days on the screened front porch. Huckleberry would sit and watch the girls play outside. But when it was time for his walk, he hid. We all felt sorry for him, but decided to let this timid animal spend his summer as he wished, curled up on his comfortable porch chair. One morning, a pipe burst in the kitchen, and my father called the plumber, young Charlie, who was the son of one of his fishing buddies, old Charlie. Young Charlie was accompanied by an old black lab named George, who announced their arrival loudly from the back of the pickup truck. The girls scooted outside to greet the dog, and were thrilled to see that he wanted to play. After a rousing game of catch, with a romp around the property, all were in need of a cold drink. Huckleberry had watched them play from his window seat. When they stopped to rest, he began to howl. All efforts to silence him were to no avail. The girls hooked up his leash and pulled him outside. At that moment, the black lab stepped up, grabbed the leash in his mouth, and began to walk Huckleberry around the yard. The howling stopped. Huckleberry held high, a spring in his step, tail wagging, followed in whatever direction George led. Both dogs were rewarded with hugs and doggy treats at the end of their walk. The next day, young Charlie arrived with George and announced that his dog was very anxious to return to our house. From that day on, George, who appeared to know that he was doing a good deed, took Huckleberry on his daily walk. The summer slipped away and school beckoned. It was time to return to the city. Both dogs nuzzled each other as we packed the car for the journey home. The following winter was harsh. Huckleberry became ill after eating something encrusted in the snow and died within a week. The entire family was horrified. We mourned, each in our own way, and my parents decided not to get another pet. Our lives continued. Winter passed, spring blossomed, and summer was at hand once more. The trip to the country was marred by the emptiness we all felt without Huckleberry. Within a few days, young Charlie's truck pulled into our driveway and George was lifted out the truck. Over the winter, he had lost the sight in one of his eyes, and young Charlie felt that walking Huckleberry would enrich George's life. Dad explained the situation to young Charlie, who was deeply saddened by our loss. George still gets around okay, but he's getting old. Sure, makes me sad that he won't have his friend to play with this summer, he said. We all felt a lump in our throats as the pair departed. The next morning, the girls announced that they had a plan. We drove into town and visited the town's thrift store. We purchased one extra large stuffed animal, 2 pairs of old roller skates, and one cabinet door to cut the board to size, and my mother glued the stuffed dog onto the platform. Dad bolted the skates to the bottom of the plank, and the girls made a coat from Huckleberry's chair blanket. When the coat was tied around the finished product, we called young Charlie to bring George for a visit. We crossed our fingers as the black lab sniffed the creation. My daughters attached the leash to it and handed it over to George. We'll never know if he humored us or if Huckleberry's scent gave him the feeling of having his friend back. However, for the next 8 weeks, George took pride in walking that stuffed animal. The story spread around town, and many of the residents came by to take pictures of the event. Shortly after returning to the city that year, we learned that George had passed away in his sleep, the stuffed animal at his side. We cried when we got the call. A few days later, when our summer photos had been processed and picked up, our sorrow turned to joy. The pictures of George leading his friend around were vivid reminders of the happy times we spent with Huckleberry and George. We knew we had witnessed a true act of love. Now, the 2 dogs will live forever in the telling and retelling of one of our favorite family stories, The Great Dog Walk. And that is where we are going to leave it, my dear friends. Tune in next video for what we are going to read at that time would be Velcro Bay. May you all have a wonderful morning, noon, or night whenever this video reaches you. This has been Ruby, signing off.